Hello and welcome to Open Art Critique number 9. Today I will be reviewing this portrait by Jeff Taylor. My name is Daniel Folta with Evolve Artist, and through these Open Art Critiques we are providing objective, constructive feedback, putting style aside, and simply focusing on how can we make this painting more realistic through the Evolve Artist method. So let's get into it. So first, let's just take a look at this and make sense of it. There's some really great things going on in here. And first, making portraits is not easy. Correction, painting portraits is easy when you can simplify it and understand it for its basic moving parts. But it's easy for our brain to trip us up and to make it more than it really is. Many of you know that I am a huge stickler on light and shadow. He's got a great sense of light in this piece. It's just glowing. His colors, incredibly vivid colors, and high contrasting values just about everywhere in the painting. Now, his edges, what's interesting about Jeff's work is he really has no soft edges anywhere. He just has these shades and value and color bumping right up against each other, and he's using his variations in those shades to create a little bit of form. But he doesn't actually have any soft graded edges anywhere, which is sort of contributing to this almost pop art, vivid, bold, stunning style that he's got going on here. So it just made me think, in the realm of realism, how far could we push this painting using just our values and color? So ignoring those soft edges. That's what I'm going to start with, and we'll go from there. Real quick. Every painting has 3 moving parts: values, edges, and color. Value is how light or how dark something is. Edges are how soft or how sharp that value bumps up against another one. And color is color. So to learn more about those, you can check out our Art Fundamentals series. That way I can focus on this critique specifically. So for this critique, I will be digitally painting on top of what's here. Not to deliver a great painting or anything like that. I'm actually not very good at digital painting, but simply to show you what I am talking about and these different ideas to help them make sense to you. I imagine a lot of us are visual learners, and so I will be using a hard brush the entire time, and so just seeing what we can do with value and color. Still, for when I'm working, the first thing that we want to do in the Evolve Artist method is to break the image down into light and shadow, and doing this is going to simplify the entire painting for all of its complexity and just break it down into 2 parts. And from there, I can make educated decisions going forward. And because Jeff has done a nice job with his light and shadows, this is really easy for me to do, and I'm just going to block this in here. Now I want to review Jeff's values, starting with the shadows. As a general guideline, I want to make sure that all of the shadows are darker than all of the values in my lights. And I am seeing some very bright reflections in here which I want to address. You see these bright spots in these areas? These are shadows that have light reflecting back into them, but they are shadows. Shadows first. So I'm going to bring these down in value so that they read as reflections inside of a shadow, not as being part of the main light source. Let me explain what's going on using a 10-step value scale. We want to first break that value scale into our light and shadow. So let's look at Jeff's painting and find the parameters of his shadows, his darkest shadows and his lightest values in his shadows. So I'm seeing a really dark shadow in here in the jacket, but then we've got these really bright reflections. And so it's really spanning from 10 to 3, which is a pretty large range for your shadows. And looking at the lights, actually Jeff did a really nice job on these lights. We're looking at something like a value 1 to 6. That's actually pretty solid. But if I could describe visually what's going on here, it's almost as if you were to take these letters and stretch them into each other, overlapping so that they are no longer legible, no longer visible and easy to understand. We want the impression to immediately resonate so that the viewer can quickly understand what's going on, and rather than trying to solve a puzzle, they can immediately be drawn into the beauty and the message of the piece. By darkening my reflections and thinking of them first as shadow, I am creating clarity for my viewers. So now let's talk about the values in the lights. And looking at these, I'm seeing a similar pattern where Jeff is going from 0 to 100 really quick. We've got these dark shadows that are becoming very bright reflections, and we're also seeing how these lights are just going straight up there into the high, very light values for these highlights when really they don't need to be. We don't want to exhaust our value range. By having more transitions in our middle ground, we will be able to create a more three-dimensional illusion. So let's start with this chair. Look at how bright these highlights are. When we take that down, creating more of a middle ground, we can capture a better impression of this velvet. So moving on to the jacket, I'm going to start with this darker value, make sure that it's kind of cleaning up everything going on here, and then I can build up my lighter values on top. And notice as I'm moving across to the right, I'm going up in value, but I'm not dragging those lighter values over to the left side of the jacket. I'm keeping this structure, this nice hierarchy, and I'm just slowly building it up, and I'm just nudging my values a little bit higher each time. I'm not jumping straight into those really bright highlights. We don't need to. And we can create a much more elegant piece as a result. Alright, now the fun part, the face, which I will treat just like I have for everything else because it's just value, edge, and color. So starting with my darker values and slowly building up my lights, you can see how there's sort of this choppy, harsh effect that's happening here because I'm using this hard Photoshop brush and I can't soften any of my edges, but I'm still creating this overall impression of form. But as you can see, there's really no end to what you can do with just placing the right value and color in exactly the right spot. And technically, if I kept going and going and going and shrinking down my values by tiny increments, I would be able to have this beautifully soft effect on the painting without ever having placed a soft edge. Basically, what I've done for all of these objects is keep that value range under control. And I'm thinking about the values of each object as it relates to the entire painting. That value scale is not per object in my painting. That value scale is there for the entire painting. So how am I keeping a limited value range and keeping myself from getting too dark over there and too light over here? Well, it comes back to that light and shadow. Once I know what my shadows are, the parameters for my values for each object become so much easier to find. Let's just say that all of my shadows, regardless of the object, are from 10 to 6, and all my lights are from 5 to 1. Looking at the values on my jacket, those are where some of my darkest shadow values are. So I know that I can fall into that 10, 9 range, but then in my lights, when I compare the lights in my jacket to other lights, like the lights on the face, I can see that the lights on the face are much lighter than the jacket. And so I want to keep my values low for the lights so that I have room to create that brighter impression in the face. So we can look at a value 10 to 4 for the jacket. And so I have control over my value ranges for each object based on the entire image. I'm not exhausting my values in any of these objects so that I can really bring out the correct value in something else. All of these things in relation to each other. Whereas what I'm seeing, Jeff, in your painting is that you've treated each object like it has its own value range from 10 to 1, and you've exhausted that value range completely for each object. Now, when I'm painting, I'm not thinking number 1 or number 2 or anything like that, but the thought process, these decisions, these hyper-specific relationship comparisons, I'm juggling all of these things so that I can maintain this overall impression for the entire painting. So how would this look different if we added some soft edges? Well, unfortunately, I'd have to repaint this entire portrait in order to fully do the edges justice, but I did try to overlay some gradients in some areas where there are form shadows. And I made a quick sketch of where the cast and form shadows are in this one. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out our edges video and the fundamentals. But toggling between these, you can see how the form turns, especially in the jacket and a little bit more in the forehead and the cheek on the man's face. So Jeff, my biggest advice would be to rein in your values and keep each object in a controlled range based on all of the values in the painting. And this is why in the Evolve program we have our students simplify their paintings down into only 4 values. We want to train their eyes to see something like this portrait for all of its complexity and simplify it down to just a few things so that without being overwhelmed, they can confidently bring out the elegance and beauty of a portrait. So great job on this portrait, Jeff. Personally, I love the color choices that you made. Notice how in Jeff's painting, as he gets closer in his middle ground areas, right before his lights meet the shadow, he gets really, really colorful. And that's actually a great way to turn form using color. Also in the background, how it goes from on the right side a little bit warm and drifts into some cooler tones. That also helps create a little bit of separation in the background behind the chair. Really appreciate those things, Jeff. And speaking of color, next week is going to be my 4th video on the fundamentals, which is all about color. And so you can look forward to that next week. Now, if you would like to have your artwork critiqued through the Evolve Artist method, then you can do that by going to the link in the description, and I will get back to you, and you also may find yourself in one of these open art critique videos. So that's all for now. Thank you everyone, and happy painting.